Sharon Tharp, why should people listen to this episode of Pod Friends featuring you?
Well, if you're not familiar with me, I hope you get to know me a little bit. I've been covering reality TV and some of your favorite reality shows for almost 20 years now. And if you are familiar with me, I hope you learn a little bit just about me, my career, my background. I'm always happy to share those things and help anyone that wants to break into this. And the other thing is, like, if you just are a huge reality TV fan and want to learn a little bit about the behind the scenes and how things work and how exit interviews work and how these interviews work and how to prepare for an interview and all that good stuff, we dive a little deep into that. And I'm happy to share that because it's kind of fun. And I hope everyone thinks it's fun too.
Sharon is a legend.
Sharon
Tharp.
God damn, are you Sharon Tharp?
I was following you on Twitter so I could learn more about the franchise before coming in, and there was no better person to study up on everything than you.
When you put it that way, it sounds like you're a good luck charm.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pod Friends. My name is Matt Scott. I'm your host, and just starting out, I want to say I'm sending so much love to everyone out there. I feel like the world has been a lot, not only throughout January, but in general. I think for a lot of folks that the world's sometimes always a lot. And so rather than even asking how you're doing, I just want to say I'm sending so much love. And that's what Pod Friends is about, just showing up as who we are. And today I'm so thrilled that the person who showed up for Pod Friends was the one, the only Sharon Tharp. And in case you don't know Sharon, she's an entertainment reporter, an editor, and someone who delivers the news to us on so many different fronts. I mean, she's done prolific interviews with Dr. Will Kirby, who's currently on Deal or No Deal Island, June Song, Craig from Southern Charm, Chelsea from BB26, Tucker, America's Favorite Player. Those are just some of her most popular interviews in the last handful of months, actually in the last year that she's done the podcast. And again, you could check that out over on YouTube. One thing I appreciate about Sharon is that she's one of the hardest working people in entertainment. You'll hear that from so many people. Look at her work on the exclusive podcast in this month alone, where she's covered The Traitors, Dondi, Southern Charm, and she's had great guests like Kelly Wentworth from Survivor, Jemmy from The Challenge, Rachel Riley from Big Brother, Tyson Apostle, so many others. And so check out what she's doing over on the exclusive. But just a few plugs before we get to the podcast. Listen to Kellen, listen to Carolyn on 15 Minutes with Friends over on Patreon, patreon.com/RHAP over on the free tier. Please leave a voicemail, and I'll check those out in just a couple of episodes as the season ends. Speakpipe.com/podfriends. Please leave a voicemail. I'm always excited, thrilled, surprised, elated when those come in. So drop me one of those. And tell a friend about Pod Friends and tag RHAP and me, MattScottGW, on all platforms as you share about the show. I'm especially on Bluesky these days, as well as on Instagram and in the RHAP Patreon Facebook group. So now, without further ado, here is my introduction for Sharon. Making her way to the podcast, hailing from New York City by way of the great state of New Jersey, she is a leading writer and editor with more than 15 years experience, having interviewed the likes of Dylan Efron's brother Zach, Nick Jonas, Ariana Grande, Duchess Meghan Markle, and countless reality stars. You know her from a number of magazines, journals, and platforms, but you may know her best from the exclusive podcast. Please welcome the sharp, savvy, steadfast, strategic, sociable, seasoned, sincere Sharon Tharp. You know what? I think I've got this. Though. I think as long as you
got it
like that.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah,
you got it.
But I'm excited for this, and just excited to dive in and have you as part of Pod Friends, Sharon, because I mean, I think a lot of people, especially super fans, know your name from the coverage of so many reality shows, your coverage on the exclusive. But yeah, have you been interviewed before? Like you being interviewed about you?
No, I've done like speaking events at colleges and stuff about my career, but I've never been, I don't think I've ever been personally interviewed. And to be honest, like I was a little nervous because I do try to keep my personal life separate from my reporting, but I also think it's important to share sort of my story and generally in media. And if someone wants to get into it, if I could be helpful, like that is cool to me. So I'm, happy to oblige, but I am a little nervous because I'm like, I'm used to interviewing people. I'm not used to answering questions.
Hey, we're both nervous then together. It's perfect. I always feel like there's like some level of nerves like going into interviewing people, even when I know it will go so well. I don't know what that's about, but
no, that's normal. I have the same.
Okay, yeah, I'm curious. I was curious about that for you, but I'm sure we'll get into that and more of your background. I mean, maybe like a place to start, just like on a base level. And I think this is a great place to start because there are folks who are listening who definitely know you as super fans. There are others who don't know you, but like, not to be rude, but like, who are you?
Who am I? That's a good question.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I call myself entertainment journalist. I studied journalism, so journalist, but it's kind of evolved over the years. But I would say a majority of my career has been in celebrity and entertainment. And right now I'm currently doing a couple different things, but yeah, I'm a journalist, reporter, I guess you would say, writer, editor, all the above. Now a podcaster, apparently.
Yeah, no, apparently, I guess so. And almost 10,000 subscribers. I'm under no presumption that this will like push the YouTube past the 10,000 mark, but like I'd be honored if somehow it did. But like, cool. So it's interesting what you're talking about though. I don't consider myself a journalist. I didn't study journalism, but in my work outside of podcasting, even like I'm the director of storytelling and engagement at the nonprofit where I work, and I do a lot of interviews and host and created a docuseries. And what's so interesting about that is that has led me to like speaking at a bunch of different journalism schools or journalism conferences where I always feel this imposter syndrome of like, hey, you all know that I'm not a like capital J journalist, but part of why I bring that up is because I also feel like there's this idea, and I'm curious how you were sort of brought up in journalism in this sense, but this idea of like, there's me and who I am, and I keep that separate from my reporting and my coverage. There's so much to get into with that, but I'm like curious, like as you mentioned, not bringing yourself into the stories as much. Like, what has journalism sort of been like for you in terms of what standards it has set in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly evolved over the years. When I was studying journalism, print magazines were a big thing, and that was what I wanted to do. I thought it was super cool to work in a magazine. I interned at a bunch of magazines during college, and I was like, this is great. I'm going to be an intern. I'm going to work at Hearst or Condé Nast or one of these big places, which I interned there. But as soon as I graduated, it was a recession. And so all these magazines were folding. And I was like, well, what do I do now? And I sort of fell into digital storytelling and digital reporting and went that way. And then obviously over the past 10 years or so with podcasts, with social media, it's just evolved more and more where, a traditional journalist is sort of now like intertwined with, reality TV podcasters. Like they come off of The
Mhm.
Bachelor and they have a really successful podcast. And
Right.
so, which I love because I do think, I'm learning a lot from that as well. But I think
Mm.
the important thing for me is those standards and personally keeping my sort of stuff out of the interviewing because I think it brings a little bit of a credibility to it. I think covering reality TV and celebrities does get
Mhm.
complicated because, I have favorites when I'm watching these shows, like,
Yeah.
and I'm on Twitter commenting, and I don't want to be that person that's like, well, I have to be objective and I'm not going to share my favorites. But there is a line, right? Like if I'm interviewing someone and they're not my favorite contestant, I still want to give them a fair chance, give them the same interview I'm giving someone that I really enjoy. And so that's been
Mhm.
a little difficult to navigate because usually I keep my opinions out of things. But with reality TV, I think it's okay to sort of share some of that stuff sometimes as long as there's a line. But I don't know, it's still evolving, right? Like I don't even know where
Yeah.
that line is sometimes.
Yeah, and that's the thing I think that I've picked up on in like from journalists that I know and who have talked with who where like it is changing. Like you see more people bringing themselves into the story or sharing their lens. Like that's the word I often use, like their lens or their perspective and giving folks an insight into that. But I don't know. It's really fascinating because like, I think reality TV in particular is a place where I could imagine like you sharing yourself being leading to some sticky situations, whether it's like beefing with reality stars who might not think that you're respecting the players enough or whatever the case might be, right? But like outside of your working career as a journalist, who would you say that you are beyond the work and
Oh,
career of it all?
oh, that's interesting. It's tough for me to answer that because I've always been a bit of
Mhm.
an overachiever. I don't like to use like workaholic. I don't like those like sort of
Yeah,
toxic words,
yeah.
but I just really enjoy what I do. And so it's fun for me. I'd be watching reality TV and covering and watching what celebrities are doing anyway. And so I've been very lucky to make a career out of that but obviously that gets tricky because, you want to have separation. You don't want to be constantly working and on Twitter and tweeting about it's that's the tough balance of doing this sort of job. But I don't even think I answered your question. Who am I? God, just everything comes back to my work, which is really not the
Yeah.
best. Currently, right now, I am working on trying to strike up a balance because my personal life,
Mm,
my social life has taken a bit of a hit over the last couple of years. But
it's
you
relatable.
know,
Yeah.
I found for example, I found a passion for traveling, so like I get joy out of
Mhm.
that outside of my work. I'm learning a language, trying to be fluent in that. Like I'm picking up hobbies outside of this sort of reality TV entertainment world. But I will say the last 5 years I've been very deep in that. And so it's hard for me to disassociate and say, here's who I am outside that. But I think people would
Yeah.
be probably surprised to know I'm pretty sensitive. I'm a pretty sensitive person. Uh, so yeah, I don't know. An empath, I would say, which I think also comes into
Mm.
my interviews. Yeah, who else am I? I don't even know. That's a good question. It's still evolving.
But I no, I love that. I love that too. And like that's part of what will come out as we're talking, I'm sure, just
Yeah.
because it is tough. Like I mean, I do think one, there's so much work that goes into being an interviewer and asking the right questions and also just managing the dynamic along the way and a million other pieces that go into the work, which is something I definitely want to come back to and ask you about. But it is also tough. Like if someone's asking me who I am, like, yeah, so much of it is is like the work that I do and is like what people see. And I do think like I don't know, maybe increasingly, especially the more exposed you are, the more out there you are, like it does become intertwined. I feel like I've been working for a long time. I'm like, yeah, like I'm right. It's like avoiding the W word, workaholic, but at the same time, like being someone who is an overachiever, being someone who puts so much in, sometimes, yeah, it is hard to like distinguish what you are without that because that's part of you. So I totally understand where you're coming from with that.
Yeah, I've got very hardworking parents and
Hmm.
been working. I've had a job since I was 14, and so I really don't know anything else other than work.
What was your first job at 14?
Okay, so this might surprise people, but I actually worked at McDonald's for 10 years of my life, all through high school and
Ooh.
college. I
Hmm.
paid for college that way and was working like 40-hour weeks and going to school. And I think that's probably where I got my work ethic from. Obviously, also my parents didn't grow up with a lot. My mom was a single mom, and so
Hmm.
yeah, I just worked my whole life. And so when I'm not working or I'm taking a break, it's a little weird, and I kind of miss it in a weird way. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's a maybe it's not healthy. This is stuff you go to therapy for, right? To talk this
Right.
through, but that's the current state and that's what gives me joy. So
But I also don't think it's like uncommon. I think most people could relate to that. And it is, I mean, there's so many layers to it, but like just thinking about the way the world is, like people put pressure on you to work harder. You think you need to constantly put more in. I've even heard some folks comment on the idea of like work-life balance, where should these things be in balance or should you be putting more into the life aspect of it? And it's all really complicated, but I definitely relate to that in terms of like working. I think I started working like really working when I was like 12 for my dad's like home healthcare business, constantly like helping him as he was starting that out. And then like by the time I was like 14, I was like working as like a soccer referee in my town in New Jersey locally and all of that. I did not work at McDonald's at any point, but look, I'm just saying, how
yeah.
was working at McDonald's
I mean, it was
for 10
good life
years?
lessons. I like I
Hmm.
said, overachiever, so you could probably relate, but like by the time I was 17,
Hmm.
I was like managing and I was,
Yeah.
whatever. But dealing with people and food service, like it definitely gives you a lot of perspective and just how to deal with people and how to again empathize with people. But also there were some negative stuff too. I've gotten stuff thrown at me. I've gotten screamed at.
Ugh.
Like you kind of grow a thick skin. I don't look back. I look back on it positively
Yeah.
just because it was a good learning experience. But it's not my favorite thing that I've ever done.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because I do think there are all of these I'll call them side quests or these different things that we do, if even just to like pay the bills or a job's a job at the end of the day. But it sounds to me, because you mentioned that you study journalism, that I know as someone who considered studying journalism and then went in the
Mm.
route of studying business and marketing, that like if you study something, often that means there was a passion for that. Like, did you always want to be a journalist, or were there like different paths growing up where you're like, oh, I wish I could be an astronaut or something else? I'm curious about sort of where the roots of where you are now started.
Yeah, growing up, like I maybe my one off was like I wanted to be an artist and because I like to paint, but I was not a good painter. But no,
Mm,
I think I've wanted to be a journalist since high school. I mean, there was definitely a push, I feel like, from people around me being like, "No, be a teacher, be a teacher." I don't know what that was
mhm.
about, that people just always like pu I don't know. I grew up in New Jersey. It was just like everyone was becoming a teacher or something, and I thought about it, but journalism just really spoke to me. And then once I went to college and took the classes and was like interning, I was like hooked. And then
Mhm.
seeing your name in like the school newspaper, like that stuff's cool to me. Like that was
Yeah.
fun. So yeah, I think pretty early on I knew I wanted to do it, which is funny because during high school, I didn't like to write. It's not like I liked writing papers or reading books that they made
Mhm.
you read. It was just, I don't know, it was a different kind of writing. So I really enjoyed it.
No, it's fascinating, and I think that there's so much that I'm connecting with because one, I'm also, while I live in Washington D.C., from New Jersey, the beautiful Garden State,
Where are you
up in
from, by the way?
Essex County, West Orange, New Jersey.
Okay.
What part of New Jersey are you from?
I'm from a town called Tom's River, so it's like Jersey
Oh
Shore.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, it's one. I was actually interviewing Sam Moore, who's a producer with RHAP, of course,
Of
and
course.
he's also from New Jersey. And I feel like there's something unique about the New Jersey experience, but as someone who is in it, I have a hard time wrapping my head around it. But a lot of hardworking people, a lot of characters for sure, which makes for more interesting writing, I'd say. But I was also when I was in high school, I should say, my senior year, I was on the school paper, and I like oddly ended up writing. It's a long story, but ended up writing like most of the articles. So it was like, oh, article by Matt Scott, because no one else ended up writing their writing their
Oh.
articles. So, but it's funny because I never even I don't think I knew that was the storytelling would be something that I was interested in, even though I guess in retrospect I see the seeds. And I'm also like at this point not a big writer, so it's interesting to
Mhm.
see that. But it's what was it like for you to actually study journalism?
Um, it was I loved it, but the problem was it was kind of old school, right? Like it was print
Hmm.
journalism. You're learning about how to write for a newspaper. At that point, newspapers were like barely paying their employees. They were like, it wasn't a good, it was, I learned a lot, but there was one digital media class and it was very rudimentary. I mean, I'm not that
Hmm.
old, but I'm older. So
No.
like when like the internet was around, guys. But it was not like there were websites for every magazine or there were a
Yeah.
ton of websites to work for. And so that was really like a learn on the job thing because that's not stuff I
Hmm.
learned in college. And so the people that are becoming writers now, yes, it's good to know journalistic standards and to know AP style and all this stuff you learn in college, but really like I learned a lot just working and experiencing things. So like yes, a journalism degree is great and I think you do learn a lot and probably a lot more now, but it's not necessary if you have the skill to write and the passion to learn like the standards that at least I hold myself to certain standards, but yeah.
Yeah. No, it's interesting though thinking about just the landscape at the time when you were studying journalism, and then also the world that you were going out to, because I mean, even now, looking at the last 5 years or 10 years at what's changed when it comes to print, like things shifting from print journalism to digital, and different outlets on the local level, in many cases, shutting down, and all this, yeah, all of the different shifts. I am really curious, like, did you know that you would go into entertainment journalism? Or was there perception that you would go in a different direction?
Good question. I feel like it was a little bit of a happy accident. I mean, I wanted to
Hmm.
do magazine journalism, so to an extent that is entertainment, lifestyle, celebrity.
Yeah.
But yeah, my first job, I mean, I moved to New York City. I saved up some money for McDonald's, moved here
Hmm.
without a job, which I would never recommend, but hustled and got 2 part-time writing gigs, weren't paying that much. Those sites don't even exist anymore. They were just like with 2
Yeah.
small websites, but I was writing celebrity entertainment content. And really, once you get going and get those bylines, it's much easier to get the next one. I think
Hmm.
that's the big hurdle is that sort of first job or first byline. And then it's much easier to say, listen, I wrote for this and I did this. But it was a little bit of a happy accident. But I definitely always loved entertainment reality TV. I mean, I've been watching reality TV. Like The Real World was big when I was younger. So like I
Mm.
watched that from the beginning and
Hmm.
actually was funny enough, to be honest, I was a bigger fan of The Challenge than
Yeah.
probably Big Brother and Survivor for a while, like
Hmm.
early on. And then And then I was hooked on Big Brother and Survivor once those started airing. But yeah, that's sort of the trajectory.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I feel really thankful because I keep forgetting how old I am. I'm 32 now. So like just to give
Okay.
context of like the era of reality TV, I remember growing up with The Challenge and becoming really hooked on that. And The Challenge has evolved so much, as we all know too, to this like athletic competition. But it is really interesting because when I think back to that time, I also remember my mom getting the People magazines, and I would just flip through those. And this was maybe the peak of, like, in a lot of cases, like a pretty toxic tabloid
Yeah.
culture and difficult culture for a lot of celebrities, especially women in Hollywood and the like. But it's like really interesting thinking back to that and where we are now. You mentioned The Challenge, though, the Real Worlds. Were there other shows that you were excited about, or I'm even curious if there were any like I'll say reality characters that you were
Hmm.
gravitating to like at that time?
I mean, oh God, I watched everything. I mean, I
Yeah.
watched The Real World. I watched The Apprentice. I watched The
Hmm.
Osbournes, like all those old Nick and Jessica
Yeah.
Simpson,
Oh my
like
gosh.
all
Yeah.
that stuff.
Uh-huh.
But sorry, I'm also like breaking out in hives. So I'm being very vulnerable here because I actually never get nervous, but when I'm talking about myself, I get nervous.
Oh no. I'm sorry. Well,
No, it's all
hopefully
good. It's
that.
all good. But I want to be real with people. Like I am not, I'm usually interviewing. So being interviewed
Oh.
is interesting.
Well, I appreciate I appreciate you navigating hives for people, and hopefully it only gets
Yeah.
more comfortable over the course of our time together.
Oh no, of course. It's fine. But yeah, I was into all those shows, Top Chef, which like sometimes I do stop and think, I watched Top Chef, for example. That show's been on for 20 years. I've watched it since the beginning. Same thing with Big Brother and Survivor. Like the fact that I get to
Hmm.
cover it, the fact that I know people that are on the show. I was on set for Top Chef. Like I'm on set of these shows. Like
Yeah.
I'm it's such a cool thing that I probably don't appreciate and stop and think about. But yeah, like I've been watching these shows forever and I always thought it was like a guilty pleasure. Like me and my brother and
Yeah.
my sister would watch it and I'm like, I just never thought it would be a career. So it is a really cool thing to think about.
Yeah, no, it is interesting because like thinking about even like being a podcaster. I've just been talking with some folks recently about like I joined RHAP in 2020 with a bunch of other podcasters as part of the class of 2020, and it is so surreal for me now. There was a fundraiser that we did that like Dr. Evie Jagoda from of Survivor fame was organizing, and there was basically, it was a ton of survivors, like I think 15 people from Survivor, and then me and Josh Wigler and also Grace Leader, podcasters as part of it. And it is so strange to be so close to this thing that, I mean, none of us were part of it 5 years ago because most of them were on Survivor after the pandemic, in the pandemic, and the like. But it is, yeah, I don't know. It's really interesting to be so close to it, just because it's come up. Like, what is that like for you to be so close to this thing that you were once just like watching on the other side of the screen or on the other side of the tabloids and the like?
Yeah, it's very cool. I am very lucky. It can get tricky. I will say I've become friends with some people that go on these shows, and I still always maintain that sort of journalistic standard. I
Hmm.
have been in situations where it's a judgment call of like, okay, this person is a friend of mine, but I have to report this. And so working at Us Weekly for many years has sort of helped
Hmm.
me shape how I handle source reporting and how I handle, that sort of thing. And I'm sorry we're jumping around here, but we've talked
That's
about
okay.
like the evolution of social media and how, like, for example, there's these accounts that will just like, the spoiler accounts and the reporting accounts and how that's
Right.
been interesting to navigate as well because and also like no hate on these people. I some of them are really good at what they do.
Hmm.
But I always want to maintain like what I'm reporting and my reputation. And I want people to know that they can trust me. And that's sort of what my whole thing is. I want people to feel comfortable to come to me knowing that I'm not just going to run this information and post it. I, very much don't post things unless I double source them from 2 independent sources. I vet the information. Sometimes there's a ton of stuff I never post and never report on. And
Mhm.
it's so funny because people are like, oh, Sharon didn't even know this. And it's like, no, I did know, but you have to make a judgment call sometimes of like, is this worth posting versus is this worth hurting someone's feelings? Is this worth,
Mhm.
there's just so much little nuance to it that's evolved with social media that I'm still navigating. And at the end of the day, what I want to do is uphold the sort of standard that I've set for myself of being that trusted confidant. So if someone tells me something, and that's why people come to me because I
Yeah.
think people think I dig a lot, and I do dig. I definitely dig. But a lot of times people will just tell me things and then I just,
Mhm.
figure out if I want to do something with that information or hold it. But again, I don't have the answers to all of this because it's evolving, and I bet you in 2 years it'll evolve again because
Yeah.
it's just never the same with media. It's always different. So I don't even know if I answered your question.
That sounds about right. No, you definitely did, and you actually brought up something in terms of the evolution that I wanted to get to because I'm curious what you've seen, kind of bouncing back a bit to like just your perspective on the media world. Like, what and feel free to like talk through this, however, because I'm sure that there are a lot of elements to this. But what have you seen as the evolution? And maybe this is more specific to entertainment
Mhm.
media and the like. But what have you seen as the evolution over the course of your career? Or one way I like to ask this, which I was just talking with another guest about, was like, are there sort of eras to the evolution of entertainment media that you've witnessed and been part of?
For sure. I know you brought up sort of the tabloid world, and when I was
Hmm.
just out of college, that was very much like people were being chased by paparazzi, and every cover of every magazine was this girl's too fat or skinny, like gross things, right?
Right.
And so I remember that era. I call it, I guess, the Perez Hilton era, whatever you want to call it, where it was very sort
Right.
of toxic. And I'm glad we moved on from that. And then
Hmm.
sort of after that, social media changed the game because you no longer needed to go to websites to find paparazzi photos of celebrities because they were just posting their outfits on social media anyway. They were posting their
Hmm.
kids' photos on social media anyway. So the paparazzi didn't need to follow Ben Affleck and Jennifer Garner's kids to school, which is a violation, by the way. But
Right.
you know what I mean? It changed the game in terms of how we cover celebrities and the access that we have to them.
Hmm.
And it changed how we wrote about them. So there was that sort of era moving away from that. And then even nowadays, just like God, everything is changing. Even with like photos that everyone used to throw every single photo on, like retweet someone's
Right.
photo, post it here. It's like no, that person owns that photo. Media has
Hmm.
changed so much, and I think you just have to be able to pivot. You have to be adaptable because it's going to change again. Especially if you're working at an outlet where you're at the mercy of a Google algorithm or even a social media algorithm. Um, you just have to be willing to learn and adapt because, going into media thinking I'm just going to write for a magazine and that's it, it's going to be great, it's
Right.
just not like that anymore. It's so different. When I was at interning there, everyone had an assistant, everyone had an office. uh
Hmm.
I was an unpaid intern that doesn't even exist anymore.
Right.
So things have changed so much,
Hmm.
and I guarantee you they will change again. And so you got to be adaptable. I think that's the big thing.
Yeah, I love that, like what we're talking about here with adaptability, because it is interesting. I mean, with adaptability, I would assume that there are some people who are able to adapt and continue on. And then also there are people who aren't able to adapt and who fall behind. And even just as I say that, like I think of I won't name names, but I think of a very popular talk show or former talk show, like daytime talk show person who there was just a lot of what they were doing. And I was just watching a documentary about this, but a lot of what they were doing over time, you're like, okay, well, maybe 10 years ago, we could have talked about that celebrity or done that or said that. And people just aren't accepting that anymore. But I guess I want to ask, because I do view adaptability as a skill, like how have you managed to do that along the way, like looking back at time? Because to me it feels like adapting is sort of an imperative and something you need to do, but also it is a skill, and not only in journalism, but I think looking at just all of the ways our world is changing. I'm sure a lot of people listening could relate to having to adapt in their careers and otherwise. So I'm curious what that's looked like, or how you've navigate that adaptation.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things. One is in terms of my personal career, I kind of accepted the fact that if I wanted to be an entertainment journalist and writer, that I was not going to make a lot of money. And that's the honest truth about it, is if you get in this industry, I hope it's not for the money. I hope it's because you really love it. And I hate this. That's just like, it sucks. I wish we were paid more, right? Like, I wish the case was different. And so I sort of made the decision of like, I'm going to advance in my career. Probably won't be as creative, probably won't be able to write as much, but I can make a little bit more money. And that's sort of where I became, I took that road, and that's where I'm at now. I'm sort of, I took a challenge to oversee some sports adventure sites, Men's Journal, which I'm currently doing. And I'm learning a lot. I'm learning about the business side of media. I'm learning about, I've never been responsible for a P&L. Now I am. And I'm not writing, like I'm not there writing interviews all the time. I get to on the side when I have time, but that's also why I did the podcast, is because I wanted that creative outlet. I still wanted to cover reality TV, but I wanted to make money. So it's like, you kind of have to decide what's important to you and what you want to do. And you know what, I can always go back to entertainment, and I'll probably will end up back there. But I think adapting to sort of where the media industry is right now, you have to do whatever's best for you and what makes sense for you. And that made sense for me. And then just on a more like specific level, like a specific example with Big Brother coverage.
Yeah.
When I first started doing exit interviews, not that I was harsh, but I was very much like, I got to be the hard hitting journalist. I got to ask the hard questions. And I still do that. But I think I've learned over the last few years that empathy goes a long way. And for me, I'm not a mean person. Like, I just like being kind to people. And so, like, I'd rather not be a gotcha person. I'd rather be someone that can give people a little grace, especially on Big Brother. I know Twitter gets a really bad rap, and there is a lot of Twitter that is very negative, or X, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
But I think it's evolved, and I've met a lot of good people through that. So I don't want to say it's all negative, but yeah, everyone has their pitchforks out, and they want that gotcha moment. Oh, lean into that. I just kind of moved away from that. I didn't feel good about it. I don't gain anything from doing that to someone. And so I still ask the hard questions, but I don't approach it in a judgmental way as much as I used to. And I'm not talking about someone that's racist or homophobic or something actually gross. I'm talking about the people that get snippy in the Big Brother house, that their egos get blown up. They get annoying, like human things that we all have experienced. I just think interviewing someone, especially coming out of an experience like that, I just try to approach a little bit differently than I used to. And maybe people notice that in my interviews, and maybe they don't, but I've sort of evolved in that way when it comes to interviewing.
I think what's really powerful about that, and again, my mind as I respond to what you just said, is also going back to, like, let's say 20 years ago, and how a range of folks maybe more than 20 years ago, but like the Geraldo Riveras of the world and others who
Yeah.
would take a little bit more of a an aggressive approach to their coverage. I really do feel that how you, for instance, talk about a situation, talk about a controversy, talk about a person. I was going to say, I was oscillating between like player or character, but
Right.
like really a person who's doing this, like that shapes how the fandom talks about these things. That shapes what other people feel comfortable saying or how they feel comfortable framing a conversation. And, one place where I give not to pat RHAP on the back too much, but like one place where I give Rob a lot of credit is that when there are these really difficult conversations or difficult things that come up, that I've really found that how he might approach, talking about, a situation that does involve some of these really serious topics does shape how, tens of thousands of other fans talk about them or like what's okay to say and do. And so I do think it's really important that you are bringing that empathy into the conversations, because at the end of the day, like everyone who is on the shows that we watch and love and consume, like they are people,
Mhm.
and they're people in a situation that is not relatable for a lot of us, like especially being on Big Brother, in the Big Brother house, under those lights, with those cameras, under those circumstances. It's a lot, but it really, I at least have just my own observation is that it does really make a difference how you talk about some of these issues, or even like when it comes to holding some folks accountable, what you bring up, how you hold them accountable, rather than kind of brushing over some of the topics that might be more difficult. I don't know if there are like thoughts you have on that, but yeah.
No, exactly. And I think we should hold people accountable, especially if they're hurting others or it's, a very serious topic. But most of the time, again, this is not for everybody. There's definitely been people in there that I don't have as much sympathy for.
Mhm.
I like to give them also the chance after the show to see themselves back, because this is a very unique experience. And to be able to watch yourself, if I see an old podcast of mine or an old interview, I'm like, oh my God, what was I like? We're all
Mm,
self-critical. And so I
mhm.
always like to hope that someone will watch themselves back, learn and grow from that. And yeah, me interviewing them right after they got out of the house and they have all this trauma and like dumping on them is not going to help the situation. And we've seen people come out of that house in a bad place and disappear, and we've seen people come out of the
Yeah.
house thinking they're going to be famous, and then that's also sad to see when they're not. And it's just such a unique experience. And I'm specifically talking about Big Brother, and
Right.
it's some in some weird way when people get out of that house, I want to help them. I want to say like, don't do this and don't do that. And sometimes I do,
Mhm.
I reach out because I'm like, I'm here if you ever need anything, but it's up to them. But yeah,
Yeah.
I just think you get so much more out of being kind to people. And it's funny, I never even thought about that, but you're right. Like I don't obviously Rob has a huge presence and a huge network, and people listen to
Mm.
him. And so, and even with my small like following, I don't realize I have influence in how people think about others, but I guess that is true. And yeah, I just hope that it's helping instead of hurting people, because I don't get joy out of that.
Yeah, no, there's something I'm thinking about, and I don't think the exact instance is all that important or even worth bringing up, mostly because I can't remember exactly what the instance was, but there's something that comes to mind for me where I, I I'm sure something that happened in the Big Brother house that was, again, one of these instances of problematic behavior, let's say. And I remember watching Mike Bloom, doing some of the exit press. And I think if I'm remembering correctly, I might have heard something after about how just some of the different entertainment journalists like were in touch about how do we approach these conversations. Like I am curious, do you find that there are like these relationships where you are able to like collaborate or work with others as you navigate what is like a really difficult and ever evolving landscape of reality TV coverage. I don't know. I wish I could remember the example I'm thinking of, but I'm sure it's not even worth bringing up the exact example of what
No, I
behavior it
mean,
was.
yeah, I mean, Mike Bloom and I have talked about
Hmm.
this before we interview someone because we're usually like back to back or whatever, like interviewing the same
Hmm.
day. We've talked about it before. Again, it's also depends on what outlet you're like. Maybe, there are people that do these interviews and their livelihood depends on page views, depends on clicks.
Hmm.
And so they might be more inclined to ask something that'll make a good headline. And I
Right.
don't knock them for that because unfortunately that's the world we live in with media. So much is driven by like clicks. I'm very lucky where the podcast now is my own thing. I don't
Hmm.
It's not my main revenue source by any means, and so I get to make it what I want, and my personal brand or whatever you wanna call it is just kindness and trustworthiness and
Hmm.
being someone that gives a really good interview and dives deep into people's lives, but it doesn't cross a line, I guess. It's hard.
Hmm.
It's definitely evolved, and
Yeah.
I like to say I'm proud of sort of where I'm at now, but it wasn't always that, like I did feel the pressure of like, oh, I better ask that question because Twitter's going to come after me. That, it's tough.
Yeah, I am really curious. One, I'm sure that we'll go back, and I'm curious just more about the X interview process. So we'll get
Mhm.
to that because like the behind the scenes, how that all works is really interesting to folks. But I am curious, are there any moments or interviews that you're most proud of? Just recognizing how difficult it could be, or recognizing how much of a quick turnaround there can be for this stuff.
Hmm. Oh gosh. I mean, there were a lot of difficult ones. God, I'm trying to think. I'm like, I didn't interview Luke. No. I'm like thinking, who
Oh
did I
yeah.
interview? I would say
Hmm.
like, um, I remember my interview with Amira got a lot of attention because I was a little
Right.
hard on her. And it was during the Taylor stuff. And
Right.
I really I really wanted, well, that was a hard season for me to cover. Let's just say BB24 was very
Hmm.
difficult for me because
Right.
I just, I didn't want to have those interviews. The last thing I want is to have to interview someone about bullying. It's like not
Hmm.
fun for me either. But, you know, I remember that Amira interview and I got a lot of praise for that. But looking back, I don't know. I kind of question whether I was a little too hard on her.
Mm.
Again, hindsight's 2020. I haven't seen the season recently, but um, I don't know. Like some people again were praising me. I kind of look back like I think I could have done better. but
Yeah.
uh, but in terms of like interviews, I'm actually really proud of. Oh gosh, there's so many. But I was looking at I used to keep track. I've done like thousands at this point, but
Right.
I got a lot of praise for my Dr. Will interview, which I was very happy about. Only because he's not easy. He goes all over the place and you never know where he's
Right.
going to go. And that interview, I've been friendly with Dr. Will for almost 10 years now, which I don't know if a lot of people
Hmm.
know, but I've
Right.
been kind of begging him to do an interview forever. And when I finally got it, I was like, I can't mess this up. I got to make it perfect.
Hmm.
And I just let it happen. And I just sort of went with the flow. And I never usually do that. I'm very overprepared. I'm question by
Yeah.
and I kind of just let it go and it turned into a great interview. And after that, I learned like, yeah, you don't always need to be like, I got to go this question, this question, this question. Just let it flow sometimes. And I think those tend to be the best interviews. So I was proud of that one too.
No, I love this. I love that you said that there are so many interviews you're proud of. Are there others that came to mind? It's fun asking. For me, it's fun asking people what they're proud of. So
Yeah.
I'm curious if there are others that are top of mind. yeah, I'll hear any and all of the proud stories, only because, well, for so many reasons, but because it's really fun. Like, I just wrote down Dr. Will because I'm gonna go back and like watch that and take that in. But yeah, are there others that stand out to you that that you're proud of?
Well, some of them are not reality television related, but I've done some really cool things in my life when it comes to even like scripted TV. Like, I grew up watching Big Brother and all that, but I also grew up watching a lot of teen dramas. And so going to the set of like Vampire Diaries and interviewing my favorite actors, or I was on the set of Suits a few times and interviewed Meghan Markle before she was Duchess Meghan.
Right.
Like, those things I forget. Like, I've been on red carpets with Beyonce. Like, those things escape my mind because I haven't done that in a while. And I'm just talking about silly reality stars sometimes, but like, yeah, I have, like, before Miles Teller and Michael B. Jordan and even Austin Butler, like some of these guys that have really come up, I got to interview 10, 15 years ago. And it's cool to kind of see like, wow, look at them now. So
Yeah.
I'm proud of those interviews, but unfortunately, I don't even know if they exist anymore on the internet. They might have been scrubbed, but they exist somewhere.
They exist in your memory. Then they happened. They did
Yes,
happen. So
yes.
that's important.
Like that Titanic quote, they exist only in your memory.
Oh my gosh, yeah, no, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. And it's no, I think it's cool just seeing and hearing more about this, because like stepping back for a second and thinking about podcast listeners who are fans of all of these shows. I mean, oftentimes you as an interviewer, and I guess the same could be said for me as an interviewer on a podcast. Like, I'm a proxy for the listener who then has a bunch of different questions or who wants to bring up certain things in the conversation. So it's cool that you could be our representative in a lot of those conversations, which is kind of fun. But I have to ask you, because I realize I haven't talked with like anyone about this yet. Like, what is I'm imagining it varies for different shows. Like, I'm thinking of The Traitors because I was just watching the Tony. This will come out like after. I'm like,
I think we're
spoilers?
safe at this point.
Yeah,
I
I think
hope.
this will come out. This will definitely come out a while after Tony was
Banished.
like let go from his banished. That's what's called, not let go. There we go. Laid off from his Traitors duties. But no, I guess I'm curious. What's the exit interview process like for you behind the scenes?
Yeah, I think it definitely varies by network. CBS, obviously, I've had a long-standing relationship, so it's pretty simple. You're on a list, right? Like, it's and people have DM'd me like, how do I get on that list? How do I break into that? And it could just be as simple as sending an email to the publicist and asking. Worst thing they can say is no. And I do think as podcasts have become bigger, they're more open to having podcasters, not just journalists who work in a magazine, because for a long time that's all it was. But it varies. For Big Brother and Survivor and all of those, it's fairly simple. You get a time slot, you're back to back. These guys are doing interviews all day. The real challenge becomes, how do I differ from the rest of the exit interviews? Because they're all going to ask the same questions. And Big Brother complicates that more because these guys are coming out of the house and know nothing.
Right.
So you might be breaking some news to them. They lost their job, or there's a different president, or whatever's going on in the world.
Right.
So that's a little different. But yeah, you do your exit press, you have a time slot, and that's it. And then, but something like The Traitors, NBC, it's a little different. They don't really have like necessary exit press for every person that leaves, it seems. Like, I interviewed Tony. I probably could have asked for Dorinda. I think she did a little press. I didn't, because that's not really my audience. But yeah, so sometimes you have to request certain people, and then sometimes it's just like it's a well-oiled machine. Like some of the CBS shows are just like back to back every season. Sometimes you get 15 minutes, sometimes you get 5. I mean, I've had people cut me off after 3. And getting a lot of substance in 3 minutes is not easy. So
no, but it's like I just come back to the adaptability of it all. like
Yep.
figuring it all out along the way. But I just with all of that in mind, like we have you're talking about the exit interview process a bit. How do you prep for those? Because I'm imagining you mentioned being someone who's typically like very good about prepping your questions and the like how do you figure out what it is that you want to ask, especially with the idea of distinguishing yourself from all the other interviews or a lot of the other interviews that will ask the same, a lot of the same questions?
Yeah, there's a lot of tactics. It depends on where you are in the interviews. Like if you know you're early, you're like, okay, I can probably ask some pretty like straightforward questions. If you're later in the process, you want to think what was already asked, what could be a follow-up to the question that was already asked. Sometimes
Mm,
I'll have an interview and they just did 5 interviews and those are already published. I will read all of those interviews and I'll pull out a
wow.
nugget. I'll pull out a nugget and ask a follow-up because I don't want the same quote. So
Hmm.
that's certainly something. But when I'm writing questions, a couple of things. I always ask followers what they want to know because
Mm,
you want people to care about your interview. So you should be asking questions people want answered. But then also when I'm writing them, you have to account for people. And some people like to talk and some people answer something in two words. And
right.
so you got to over prepare because there will be people that take 4 minutes to answer one question and you get 2 questions and that's it. The interview's over. And then
Hmm.
there's people that will be like, "Yeah, it was fun." And you only wrote 10 questions and you're 5 minutes and all your questions are gone.
Right.
So, you got to prioritize. You got to put what you really want answered first.
Hmm.
Um, and then just have a bunch of backup questions. I always have and also listen, because I think a lot of people I've noticed this with
Mm,
podcasters, and I won't name
hmm.
them. They're actually big podcasters, not like, reality TV. I'm talking like bigger podcasters about
Right.
with whatever.
Sure.
They don't know how to ask a follow-up question because they're not listening to people's answers. They're just going
Yeah.
down the line. "Hey, next question." I'm
Hmm.
like, "Wait, they said something really cool. Ask something
Hmm.
else."
Hmm.
Um, so those are some of my tips. For example, the Tony one, I was like, "Tony's a talker. He'll probably probably don't need a ton." Sure enough, he actually answered them really concisely, and so I was like, he kept me on my toes. So,
Yeah, and
you never know.
yeah, and like thinking of someone like Tony too, I think that's actually a really interesting example because I mean, having watched a few of Tony's exit interviews from that example from the traders, like it's fascinating because you're just see you imagine like someone like Tony is going to go on and on and on, and then you also have to keep in mind, okay, Tony's probably doing however many different interviews. So when someone asks a question that's similar to something else he just mentioned, like how he answers that question may be very similar. He might have his script in his head of what he's saying. And so it's just fascinating to think of the different factors that come up because like even as an interviewer, like I think about what you're saying with asking follow-up questions and being really tapped in and listening closely. And yet, to your point, you're also balancing that with the fact that you can be cut off uh, early. You could be cut off, at any point, like without getting to all the questions you want to ask. And so, uh, it sounds really tricky to me that you have to navigate and balance all of that. I don't know how you do
Yeah.
it.
It gets easier for certainly with time and practice, but
Hmm.
there'll be times where they're on a tangent. They're not answering your
Hmm.
question. They're going off on a tangent and you have to bring them back. And you have to sometimes interrupt them, which I don't really like to do. I like to have my guests talk, but
Right.
if they're going on, you have to sort of wedge your way in there. And then the other interesting thing, which really doesn't happen too much in these shows, is that you'll get, okay, well, you can't ask about this, 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 and this. And I'm
Right.
like, okay, well, then I don't want to do the interview. Like I put my foot down when it
Mm,
comes to that stuff because, and I think I'm okay with saying this, but like
yeah.
publicists are protecting their talent. And
Of
so I
course.
get it. They don't
And
want
rightfully
to,
so, right? Yeah.
yes. And especially with a celebrity, like maybe they don't want to talk about their family. Maybe they want to keep that private, which I respect.
Hmm.
I think the tricky thing with that is once they bring it up, it's fair
Right.
game. So
Right.
that's the listening part. Because if someone says, hey, you're interviewing Ben Affleck, but you can't ask him about Jennifer Lopez, but he brings it
Mm,
up, oh, yeah,
right.
tell me about that. Like, then it's fair game. So
Yeah.
there's so much nuance. And, again, this is not really CBS or reality TV publicists so much. It's more of just
Hmm.
general celebrity publicists. They very much try to control the narrative, and you'll get
Right.
sometimes requests after the interview, like, please cut this, cut that, take that out. And you can play nice, but you don't have to. And so navigating
Hmm.
those relationships is interesting too, because you want to be someone that they trust and that you can work with, but you don't want to be taken advantage of. And so there's just like a lot of little things that you learn over the years, and I've luckily gotten better at, but it's,
Yeah.
things still happen. And these guys are media trained, right? Like you said,
Hmm.
and also when you're doing 5 interviews in a row, you just tend to repeat yourself because you've already said it and you're like,
Right.
yeah, this is my answer. So,
Hmm. Yeah, no, and it's just fascinating, and I love this conversation. One, just to hear your perspective, but also I think it really helps people get an understanding or an appreciation of the the art that is like everything that you're doing, because some people look at interviewing and think like, oh, and like anyone could ask questions, but there is really an art to, like you said, like bringing the empathy that you bring, asking the follow-up questions, navigating all of the guidelines and the restrictions around everything that you're doing. Like it isn't just as simple as sitting and asking a list of questions. And um I don't know. I think it's nice when people who consume all of that could also appreciate the work that goes in, or the effort or the intentionality, or like you said, doing like so many different interviews over time. It's nice that people could appreciate the difference between someone who's like just starting to do an interview or just starting to do interviews versus someone who has like thousands of interviews under their belt so far. I do want to ask you the bigger picture philosophically. Are there? I'm curious what you've learned just like about life, about the world to get like big out here. But I'm curious what you've learned about your life, about the world, about yourself in your career as a journalist, whether the
Mm.
entertainment and reality TV stuff, or anything else that you've done.
Yeah. Oh gosh. I've learned a lot. Again, the adaptability. I keep going to that, and I keep going to the empathy only because I
Mm,
wasn't like that, and I just thought this is a job, and you get the headline. I just like really have tried to hone my skills. And yeah, I
no,
had a
that's
different
great.
answer, but I went off like, my brain is not all there today.
No, I think that's the answer. Like, I think that that's the beauty of it. Like that I mean, one, and this is another thing that I think comes down to asking questions like that too. Is like the answer today could be different than the answer tomorrow, versus the answer a month from now, versus the answer when something else comes to mind for you. But I do think it's pretty that makes a lot of sense. Like the adaptability, the empathy that's needed. Maybe to like ask a related question, I am really curious, and I keep thinking about the fan perspective. But I am really curious if are there aspects of like what you do that you wish fans, listeners, viewers saw and better understood. And I say that because so often when we're watching an interview, we're thinking about the person who's being interviewed. We're thinking about their responses. The comments will be about the person, oftentimes about the person being interviewed, about their responses, and less about like you, and of course all of the work that goes in, which is the ideal, because the interview is not about you, it's about the person you're interviewing. And so I am curious if there are aspects of what you do that you wish, fans or viewers better understood.
Yeah, I guess there's a couple of things. I mean, I definitely get comments like, "Why didn't you ask this?" or "Why did you do
Mm,
this?" or "Sharon got paid to say that." first of all, I don't
Ugh.
get paid to report on Big Brother at all anymore. So if I'm
Mhm.
doing anything for Big Brother, I'm not getting paid for it.
Mhm.
But yeah, all the parameters that we're sort of put in, like, we're working around, right? And Mike and I have talked about this. Like,
Yeah.
we do our best. We try to cater to the fans and like what they want, but there's a lot of stuff that goes on that people don't see. And I do wish they sort of understood that the process is way more involved. There's sometimes 5 people on the call with you when you're interviewing someone.
Mm.
One's writing, wrap it up. One's writing, Sharon, we got to, don't ask that question. Like, there's a lot of stuff going on. And
Oh
so
my
it's not as
gosh.
simple as, and I'll give this, actually, this is more of a negative example, but I just want to tell
Mm.
people that I'm not the perfect interviewer. Like, back, this is over 10 years ago, there was a celebrity I interviewed who was not very nice. I did interviewed him a couple times. I'll just say
Mhm.
it's Zac Efron. So Dylan Efron's brother. I had interviewed him before and he was super, super nice. I just interviewed him like a week
Yeah.
before. I interviewed him again and I think he just had a bad day.
Mhm.
I think he had a bad interview. He had a bad day and he was not having it. He was like, I mean, I wasn't asking anything evasive, but he was just very much like, no, I'm not answering your
Yeah.
questions today. And I was younger in my career and it was on camera, a room full of people, publicists, network publicists, personal publicists, stylists. It's on camera. You got 4 minutes and there's someone in the background going, wrap it up the whole time. There's a lot of pressure. And I just got teary because I was like, what do I do? Like, my boss is saying this is a big interview. You know what I mean? Like, there's a lot
Mhm.
of pressure sometimes when this comes
Yeah.
to this stuff. And he just wasn't very nice. And for a long time, I was like, F him. Like, I'm not watching any of
Yeah.
his movies and all this stuff. But looking back, there's just so many factors. And I try to remember that, these people are human and a lot of them grew up in the spotlight. And I don't think that's a normal thing either. And so I don't
Mhm.
even know if I'm answering your question, but I just wanted to give that
No,
example of
that's great.
like you don't know what you're always going to get when you interview either. And so sometimes I also give grace to these bigger celebrities who just, you have a bad interaction and unfortunately that's the last thing you remember.
Yeah.
But yeah, I
No, that's I think that's a great example though too because and I really appreciate the grace or the understanding that you have in sharing that because yeah, okay, then look at it from his perspective. He's probably, if not definitely, contractually obligated to be there. He's
exactly.
doing how I don't even know how many different interviews he's doing at once in a press junket or whatever type of setup there is. So there's that as a factor. He has to be there on that day, regardless of what happens, regardless of life stuff, family stuff, relationship stuff, all of it coming up, and it the thing I really appreciate about you sharing that example is that it's just this reminder that not only that every well, it's so simple, but I find myself saying this all the time. Like everyone's human, like
Right.
everyone's dealing with stuff. Everyone has off days. Like and then when we look at and think about sometimes like the reactions to things, whether it's the comment section or how people respond, like what I hope at least is that people, like even people who are listening to this, could just be more and more understanding, more and more empathetic, more and more like, okay, something fell off, but I don't need to pile on and get upset at that person or trash them because of how I feel about it. Like just step away from the keyboard sometimes,
Yes,
is what
that's
we
what
can
I
do.
would like people to understand is like, yes, some of these people are rich, they're famous, they don't have maybe the problems that we have, but they are human. And I've learned this over the years to not take everything so personal as an interviewer because sometimes, again, they had a bad day, they found out some bad news, it happens to all of us. And
Yeah.
same thing when I'm interviewing, like I have an off day, maybe I don't do the best interview, maybe don't pile on me about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Luckily, I don't have
Yeah. I
that too
mean,
yet.
I for whatever reason, I also just thought of like a different question for you, which is I don't know. I love the questions about like what you're most proud of, but I also want
Yeah,
to
yeah.
ask you, like, is there any type of like feedback or compliment? Are there any examples of like feedback or compliments that you've received in regards to your work interviewing and in regards to your journalism that you're like, I don't know, like that you think of most fondly along the way? If I were asked this question, I would not have an answer. But I am curious if there's anything that really sticks with you in terms of like, oh wow, like I did that thing and that person, gave me the kudos or that type of feedback, meant the world. It's a tricky question,
Yes.
I think. Yeah.
To be honest, everyone who comments and shares my stuff,
Mm,
I really still feel like, oh my God, people are reading this, people are watching this. And it really was a sobering moment when I started going to events because specifically
yeah.
Oz's like Big Brother premiere.
Uh-huh.
The first year I went, I'm trying to remember when it was, but lately when I go,
Yeah.
people come up to me and say the nicest things. And I don't know how to take those kind of compliments. And so I'm like, it really, I walk out of that like, oh my God, people are so nice. And like, I can't believe
Mm-hmm.
that many people know my stuff because maybe you know this, but outside of the reality
Yeah.
TV Big Brother world, no one knows who I am. No one knows like I'm covering Big Brother. Even my friends are like, "What is that show? Like, what are you talking about?"
Mm-hmm.
So when you go to these events and people are very complimentary of your work, it is eye-opening and really,
Yeah.
really flattering. And I swear every time I go to one of those events, it warms my heart because I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, what I'm doing matters to somebody. Because sometimes you do think you're just putting it into the void
Yeah.
and like who's reading or watching it, you know?
Yeah, no, I relate to that a lot, and I love talking about that on here, Pod Friends, the Meta podcast, where we talk about like these types of things. But it's fun because I remember maybe I want to say like 3 years ago, I started doing Pod Friends, and I definitely, I would say maybe about 2 years ago, had a point where I finished the season, and you have comments and tweets and the like, but you're not hearing from people firsthand, and it just doesn't feel real. And I
Right.
remember thinking to myself, like, does it matter? Does anyone care like about this? Like, there's so much else happening, and especially when you think of everything else that just RHAP alone in the reality world covers. um there are, like, yeah, people are tuning in so much to the recaps and to the exit interviews and exit press and the like. And so I remember kind of having this thought, like, who cares? And then I went to like a Toronto live show for RHAP, and there were like more than maybe it was a couple of dozen people. And this was after I did a Pod Friends interview with the one and only Mike Bloom, which, like, podcasting career highlight. And I can't say enough how much I adore Mike on so many levels. But I heard from so many people who came up to me about why that mattered with them, why that resonated.
Yeah.
Mike sharing so much of himself and his story and journey, and these were people who were resonating like on a deeper level about how that or how other Pod Friends conversations resonated with them. And I still think I have a hard time like fully digesting some of that feedback. But the more that I go to the different live events, like, I will, if I could help it, I will not miss a live show. Like, you will see me there because it's even just that moment of hearing from people and being in conversation with someone about, like, hey, there's this topic that came up, or this conversation, often about like some really vulnerable stuff that came up. This meant the world to me for XYZ reason. Like, it's awesome. And so I'm glad that you could go to those events, whether it's Oz's events or RHAP or whatever it might be, because that's maybe one of the biggest things I would say to podcasters, entertainment journalists, others in this space. Like, go to those, because
Mhm.
there are really a lot of people who will boost your ego. But I would
Yeah.
imagine if you're anything like me, definitely in ways where it's needed, that you like get that ego boost, you get those reminders, better yet, of like why it matters. So I'm glad that you've enjoyed those, and that and looking forward to seeing you at the next RHAP event, whenever there's one in New York again, especially. But yeah, it's also cool seeing you there, because one thing that I'm sure that, actually, one thing I could definitely tell you that comes to mind for me is that, like I know from being at a couple of these RHP events where like I know that you've been there in New York. I've heard from people who are like, oh my gosh, like Sharon's here. I'm like, oh my gosh, like people. So whether or not people go up to you and say something, it's cool that like people do recognize and appreciate who you are and what you're up to. And the people who
Yeah.
go to the events are the super fans who know who you are. So I'm glad that you could actually get that much deserved appreciation, right?
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think I brought like some friends who didn't watch the show and they were like, "Wait, what is going on? Like, well, how do these people know you?" And I'm like, "I can't even explain it." So it's so interesting. And the other thing is like I give you guys a lot of credit in RHAP because I think a lot of the
Mhm.
podcasters do open up very vulnerable, share personal things. Again, I've always been sort of like, let me be the interviewer. People don't
Yeah.
care to hear what I have to say. Like I started listening to Rob because I loved his personality, I loved his opinions, and I just loved listening to him. And I never started my podcast to do that and become a personality myself. It was always about
Mhm.
the interviewing, and that's why most of my podcasts really aren't me just talking, it's really just an interview podcast. And
Mhm.
so the fact that people come up to me and are complimentary of me and I'm like, wow, because I really don't show much of my personality. So I'm like, that's really cool.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But yeah, props to you guys because again, it's taken me a while to sort of open up a little bit on the podcast and share my opinions more. I'm still probably not there, and maybe I will hold back again a little bit, but that's why I'm doing this podcast too, because I'm like, you know what? If whatever I'm saying is relatable to someone, that's cool to me.
Yeah, no, and I think what's one reason or one motivation for me just to share, because like I've talked about so many things. Like I talk, and it's natural, like in covering, like doing the Pride Has Spoken podcast, interviewing queer survivors. So there's like talking about that aspect of things and queerness, and there's there's all these pod friends conversations where we go all over the place, but like
Yep.
mental health, like imposter syndrome, confidence, like transitions in life, like grief and loss, like all these things come up. But I think the thing for me that pushes me to a place where I share more of myself is when I hear from people. I think of like actually at RHAP in New York as one example that this happens all the time at these events where I remember having like a 30-minute conversation with someone who was just confiding in me about like their own challenges and their own experience and
Hmm.
like loss and everything else that they'd had. And you know, I, I would just say for you opening, well, one, I think it's a fine line, and I think you're right for kind of walking that line for sure, because
Yeah.
some people do weaponize just you opening up and being vulnerable. But at the same time, like the benefit of that is that there are a lot of people who resonate and connect with that more deeply. And I'm sure that a ton of podcasters recognize that. Like we could just talk about the shows, or you could talk about the shows through your lens and give your perspective, and someone else could again see you as a proxy for who they are and connect with that. So, but also the thing that's cool is that people pick up on who you are along the way, regardless of if you are like directly talking about who you are, or even if you're just making a comment like, oh my gosh, I was a big fan of that show or that person, or I really love watching you on XYZ. Like people pick up on a lot. I think people pick up on a lot more than we recognize. So it's it's your
I've
journey,
noticed
but
that.
yeah, I think but you're awesome with what you do and how you're doing it. And it's cool to see the evolution of it, which I might as well ask, like, do you have like any goals or anywhere where you would like to see the exclusive with Sharon Tharp and just the rest of your platforms? Do you have anywhere where you'd like to see those grow to, or any way you'd like to see those evolve?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, it's hard for me right now with a full-time job and doing the podcast on the side. It
Hmm.
is the kind of thorn in my side of like, oh, I wish I just had more time to invest because I would be covering way more shows. Like there are tons of shows that I love that I can't cover. And so I would love to not work for corporate America for the rest of my life,
Hmm.
and do my own thing eventually. But right now, my sort of immediate goal is to continue doing what I'm doing, grow it as best I can with the resources I currently have. But yeah, I think sort of keeping it open and again, going back to that adaptability, seeing what happens in a year because things are going to change. And so I'm very much
Yeah.
like fly by the seat of my pants right now. I have goals. I would like to hit 10,000 subscribers. Let's hope that happens.
You will very soon.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. And like in terms of just like my career goals, like again, I'm in like a learning stage at work right now. I'm covering a bunch of doing a bunch of things I've never done, and I'm learning a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just happy doing that and see where it goes. And it's just funny you said that about the personality thing because like I'll read comments and someone's like, Sharon doesn't even have a personality. I'm like, yeah, but that's what I was going for. Like a little bit, like I don't.
Well, yeah.
And then at work, it's funny. No one at work knows I have a podcast. Like I'm a very different person at my
Right.
job than my like I think
Yeah.
it would be surprising to people. I'm very sort of different. So I'm still
I think
navigating all that.
I think a lot of actually I know a lot of people are myself included just because it is good to keep so much separate. And it is funny because there are so many aspects of me in my work that also appear in the podcast and vice versa. But yeah, I don't want you
Mhm.
listening to me talking about reality TV and other like I just don't like just don't. If you do, don't mention it to me because then it's awkward and then I'm thinking about the fact that you're tuning in along the way. It is nice to keep things
Right.
the things a bit separate. Too, especially because with reality TV and entertainment overall, it is not. Uh, I think there's definitely been stigma at different times, or it hasn't been as respected as like a million other things that
Agree.
that people cover. So I love this. I'm so thankful for this conversation. I have to ask you the question I ask everybody, which I'm so curious what will come up, and we'll see if we figure out anything with it. Happy to workshop with you. But my question is, if your life were a book or documentary, Sharon, what would the title be? What might the title be, and why?
Oh gosh.
Tough
I wish
question. A lot of people struggle with it, but I think you've got this. I believe in you.
I don't know. See, I hate talking about myself. And so this
Yeah.
question, I was like, and also like I'm a creative, right? Like I'm like, it's gotta be the best answer and I've got to do this and that. And it's
Yeah.
when after a long work day, I'm like, my creative brain is gone. And so
Mhm.
I don't know. What if other people like sort of said? Is it
Oh my gosh. It's
I
all
mean,
over the
no?
place. No, like, so yeah, no, there's so much, like, I mean, this is not to raise the bar too much, but, like, recently I had, Puya, who's here on RHAP, and his was, like, Securely Insecure, and we were talking about, like, imposter
Oh.
syndrome and things like that, but there are so many good titles, like, one of them, Kellen Bechtold, who was on Survivor Ghost Island and has her Road to Reality podcast, gave a title that I won't remember, but the title that jumps out to me is Doing It Scared, because that was a big theme
Mm,
of the podcast. So it is fascinating thinking about, I mean, I don't want to, you did say flying by the seat of your pants. That could be a title. But I don't know. It's tough. And it's also a big question. One question I love to ask people, but it's a big question because to sum up who you are and where you are is a lot. Like the title that I would have given a year ago, I'm sure is a lot different than the title I would give now. So
right.
it's a struggle. It's a struggle. But what are some of the elements that you would say are core to the title that is of your life?
Yeah. I mean, when you say flying by the seat of the I know I said that,
Mm,
but then it's like a misnomer because I'm like, you know what? I'm like overly prepared for everything. So it's like hard for me to nail down. But I think again, like I said, I like to be an adaptable overachiever, sort of always thinking about the next thing I can learn. I think I didn't really say this, but like I'm a nerd. I just love to learn new things, learn new cultures, learn new languages, talk to new people. And
mhm,
so I think just being open to those things is really important to me, and just not staying kind of stuck. I get bored easily. So I don't know what the title would be.
No, I'm gonna give you a title. I've never
Okay.
done this before on Pod Friends out of dozens of interviews. The title I'll give you, Sharon, is Preparedness Meets Opportunity. Like, I feel like you're very
Ooh.
big on preparing, but also there's just so much that comes up that you have to adapt to. And there's also so much to be said for putting in the work to be ready for things that come up. And so
You did
that's
good.
the title. Like,
You're good at it.
you
This is not my
gave me
forte.
you gave me the raw materials, and then I just ran with it. And I'm gonna go with it. I'm gonna stick with it. It's a lot harder also to define your own story and journey. And sometimes you just need to like have someone who's on the other end who's like listening and taking in the different pieces to do
Well,
that.
I
So yeah, maybe
appreciate
it's
that, Matt.
preparedness meets opportunity. No problem. But I appreciate you. I'm so glad we did this. I'm so glad
Yes.
that you didn't break out in too many hives. I feel like there are
No, I
probably less
cleared up.
hives at this point. That's what
I
my
hope someone
biggest
relates to that.
accomplishment.
That's why I wanted to share it. Because I was
I
like, you know
will
what?
say, yeah.
Anxiety is real.
Because also, I think a lot of people would not expect that from you as someone who is often on camera, as someone who is often in this type of situation in interviews, albeit on the other side of the interviews. But, I think there's also just a bigger picture lesson that, like, yeah, sometimes we don't know where people are coming from, what they're going through, what they're experiencing, but we could do better at trying to be understanding, trying to be
Yeah.
empathetic, in treating people as humans. Wow. Okay, just
You
pulling
wrapped it
things
up
out of nowhere here.
perfectly.
Pulling things, but
It's
actually,
perfect.
no. Well, that's what thank you. But I actually want to give you the floor
Sure.
to wrap things up with any words you have for like the community of folks who are tuning in, any words of appreciation or anything else that you just kind of want to share, any just words that you want to share with
Yeah.
folks.
No, I mean, of course, appreciation. I think, this is a hard space to be in. I think a lot of people who open themselves up to this it's not easy. And so I've gotten way more kind remarks than negative. And I know, again, I think the reality TV community gets a bad rap sometimes, but I've met
Mm,
amazing people. I've made friends that I meet up with in real life now, as opposed to online, which is very weird to my real life friends.
mm.
But just thank you for always supporting and being and reading my stuff, and it's become such a cool thing and very rewarding. And I hope, and I'm always open. My DMs are open. I might be a little slow to respond, but if anyone wants to ever get into media, I'm happy to, help with any wisdom I have, because it's not an easy world. There's, a lot going on, a lot changing, a lot of people losing jobs and gaining jobs, and I think it's doable if you want to do it. And if I can ever be of help, I'm happy to be that person. And so, yes, thank you everyone who listens and reads my stuff.
Thank you so much, Sharon, and thank you all for listening to this episode of Pod Friends. I want to give a big shout out first and foremost to the team behind the scenes at RHAP for helping make this possible and get this podcast to you, and a shout out to the next couple of guests, James Jones of Survivor 43 fame, and Josh Wigler, who are going to be making their way to the podcast very soon. So excited for that. And you could also be on the podcast if you leave a voicemail, speakpipe.com/podfriends. Leave voicemail. Let me know what you think of Pod Friends. Share a reflection, thoughts, some love, anything from this season of Pod Friends, from Pod Friends overall. And I'll check those out at the end of the season here on the show. You could follow me at MattScottGW on all platforms, and you could support Pod Friends and all of our RHAP programming over at patreon.com/RHAP. If you can, tell them that Pod Friends sent you. Tell them that I sent you. So from me and the RHAP team, thank you so much again, everyone. And thank you for being a Pod Friend.